If you want to stop political violence, look in the mirror. That's the way that we stop political violence in this country, and we've got to do it. And while we're all mourning and rooting for and praying for everybody who was injured at that ICE facility, and as far as we know, it looks like some of the detainees, in other words, some of the potential illegal aliens, were some of those who were affected. Look, just because we don't support illegal aliens, we don't want them to be executed by violent assassins engaged in political violence either. So we're praying both for our ICE agents, but also for everybody who's affected by this terrible attack. But that was an ICE facility. And as these guys behind me know, and a few of our police officers know, police officers writ large face too many threats of violence all across the United States of America. And we know where it started. We all remember the summer of 2020 when all of these violent protesters were encouraged to treat police as the enemy instead of as the solution. You'd take 1,000 police officers, you'd find one person who didn't do something perfect and use that one guy to tarnish the other 999 police officers. Well, I would like everybody, whether a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, especially those in political leadership, can we all just agree that our police officers are heroes, that they are public servants, and that the first and most important step of keeping all of us safe is to keep our police officers safe, because they are the thin blue line between civilization and chaos. Thank you all. It just happens too much. Our police officers being assaulted, our police officers being attacked. You have these crazy attacks where you have a cop in a squad car who's enjoying their lunch break, and somebody comes up and summarily executes them before the cop even had a chance. It happens way too much, and it happens because too many of our political leaders have encouraged it. Now, it's not just that. It's not just the rhetoric that encourages violence against our law enforcement. You know, when I was in the Senate, there was a big bill that was going around, and it was basically that we were going to try to eliminate qualified immunity from police officers, one of the most disgraceful and worst ideas that I've ever seen. In other words, that we were going to make it easy for criminals to sue police officers for doing their job. Now, does anybody think, when you see the fake news media and the way they attack our police officers, does anybody think that we need to make it harder for our police to do their job? No. Some of America's cities today have worse murder rates than the very worst third world cities all over the world. That's not a joke. You go to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, or you go to some of the poorest countries all over the world, even those countries have a better murder rate than Washington, D.C. or some of the major American cities. Some of them have better murder rates than Charlotte, North Carolina. That's a disgrace. All of us should be asking, how do we make that better? How do we make people safer in their communities? How do we make it easier for a young family to walk down the street in security and comfort? But unfortunately, we've got a crew of violent radicals in the United States of America who think we ought to make it harder for police to keep us safe than easier for police to keep us safe. So here's one thing I'd like to do. I'd like every single Democrat starting today, and every Republican too, while we're at it, to say that we are going to defeat these efforts to strip immunity from our police officers. We're going to make it easier for them to do their job, not harder for them to do their job. Let's fight for it every single day. Amen.
Get your breath off their ass.
That's exactly right, sir. That's exactly right. You can say that, but I can't. I've hit my quotient for cuss words today. I don't want Ted Budd to disown me, so I'm not going to say that, but we can run the clip back later. But let me just leave you with one final thought here. Look, I was asked earlier today by a reporter I actually like, but a reporter who said, well, don't both sides have crazy people? And of course, obviously, country of 330 million people, of course, both sides have crazy people. But if you look at the political violence in our country over the last couple of months, the last couple of years, it is not a both sides problem. It is primarily on one side of the political line. So if we are going to truly go after the political violence in this country, we need the Democratic leadership of Washington, D.C. to look in the mirror. We need them to renounce all political violence. When a poor kid like Charlie Kirk is gunned down in cold blood, we need them to start with condemning the violence instead of condemning something that Charlie Kirk said that they disagreed with. When you have an entire network of left-wing organizations that encourage, that promote, and that apologize for violence, you know what you're going to get out of it? You're going to get political violence. So here's my sacred obligation to you, to all the law enforcement, but every person, whether they wear a uniform or not. Over the next couple of years, the Trump administration is going to do everything that we can to dismantle the networks, to destroy the funding, and to make it harder for people to kill one another just because they disagree with what somebody says. That is what we're going to do. We're going to fight for it. Let me just leave you with this one final thought. Now, most of the time when I go around to events like this, I'm talking about our big, beautiful bill, our working families tax cuts. And I want to leave us just with a reflection on that, because while we're talking about law and order today and we're honoring the police, one of the ways in which we rebuild the American dream is by allowing you to keep more of your hard-earned money. And that bill that these great congressmen worked on and the great senator here, what it did was very simple. It increased the child tax credit. It meant that we're going to increase take-home pay by about $10,000 over the 4 years of the Trump administration. It means that if you're working on tips or if you're working an overtime shift, the government is going to take less of your money, and I think that's a pretty good idea, because if you're working hard, I think the government ought to keep its hands out of your pocket. We're going to do all those things. Because I believe the American dream is fundamentally about this principle. It's about the principle that for all the parents and grandparents out there, and I'm now the parent of 3 beautiful young kids, I just want them to have a better life than the life that I have. That, to me, is the core of the American dream. The promise that if you work hard and play by the rules, we're going to give our kids and we're going to give our grandkids something that's just a little bit more prosperous, a little bit more secure, and a little bit more proud than what we were given when we were kids. That is, I think, our sacred obligation. That by inheriting a great country from our parents and grandparents, we got to pass on something even greater to the next generation. But none of that matters without law and order and public safety. How can you have the American dream if you can't walk down your neighborhood in safety? How can you have the American dream if you're worried about getting mugged when you're taking your family out to a nice meal downtown? How can you have the American dream when every celebration, every big moment in a person's life, you're too worried about violent crime and not focused enough on the things that make life worth living? One of the things that we have got to get back to remembering is that if we want to preserve the American dream, we've got to preserve the right of everybody, rich or poor, to live in safety and security in their neighborhoods. You know, when I grew up in Middletown, Ohio in the 90s, we didn't have a whole lot of money. I was raised by a woman who struggled very often to put food on the table and clothes on her back. Mamaw. Everybody loves Mamaw. Most of all, me. But you know what? For all of the problems that we had, for all the times that Mamaw was worried about where our next meal would come from, for all the times that Mamaw was sometimes terrified that she wouldn't be able to make an important bill payment, we never worried about public safety. And the reason we never worried about public safety, the reason she knew I could go across the street and play in the park in safety and comfort, is because we had something in this country. And that was a recognition, Democrat and Republican, that we stood with law enforcement and we stood with their mission. It didn't matter what your political affiliation was. We wanted to support people who kept our communities safe. And that's something we've gotten away from, because a lot of the people who report on the news, a lot of the people who actually make policy in Washington, D.C., let's be honest, they are wealthy people who can block themselves off from the consequences of the policies they impose on the rest of us. Now maybe they've never had to call a police officer because they can call a private security guard. Maybe they've never had their home broken into because they live behind a gated community. Maybe they don't have to worry about walking down the streets of a city safely because they've got a driver in a big fancy car who can take them from point A to point B, but that is not true of the gross majority of our citizens. So I want to tell you, when I talk about protecting the American dream, when President Trump talks about fighting for the American dream, at the very top of that list is fighting for your ability, whether you're rich or poor, to be safe in the home that you love. It is our sacred obligation. It's their sacred obligation, and we're going to work for it every single day. God bless you. Thank you for having me. Now, I forgot. I told them the fake news, and I'm sure there's some real news back there. I told them I'd take a few questions. So, I'm not getting out of here just yet. We'll take a few questions from the reporters. I would prefer to start with some of the local North Carolina folks, and then we can take some national questions after that. Do we have a microphone back there?
Hey, Vice President.
I can't see you.
Over here.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Vice President,
Thank you.
thank you for taking questions from us, and thank you for visiting Concord. You referenced the awful death of Irina Zarutska. I'm just curious, have you had the chance to watch that awful video that was released by Katz, and what your thoughts are after viewing it?
Well, yeah, I've honestly seen a lot of gruesome footage, some involving my friends over the last couple of weeks. But the footage of Irina getting stabbed to death is very hard to watch. And I have not seen the whole video from start to finish. I had to cover my eyes for part of it because it is so gruesome. And maybe I should just stare at it. Maybe all of us should stare at it to know the kind of evil that we're actually confronting, because what happened to her was really, really disgusting. And I think it comes from a deep and dark and evil place that exists, thankfully, in a very few number of people, but those people we ought to lock up in prison so they can't get anybody else. But when I saw that video, you know what really got me as a father? I've got 3 little kids, 2 boys, and my youngest is a baby girl. She's 3 years old. She is the apple of my eye, as you dads will know. Daughters just have an effect on us. They get away with more stuff. They don't they? It's kind of annoying, actually. She gets away with things she should not get away with that her brothers would never get away with. But I look at this girl who's 22 years old, and I think to myself, I would love for my daughter to have the kind of life where she never has to worry about that. And there's this moment where she looks up at her attacker and she covers her mouth, and you realize what's going through her head. She knows that something very terrible has happened to her, and I hope that she didn't realize it for too long, because that is unimaginable suffering. But if you're a man, I don't care what skin color you are, I don't care whether you're rich or poor, but if you're a man and you see the pleading eyes of a girl looking up for protection, then we have to protect our girls and our women in this country. And that was my reaction to it. That was my thought when I watched it. Now, young man, this is a very earnest young man. He doesn't look like a journalist to me, but go ahead and shout out a question, because I'm not going to deny that level of energy and that level of passion. First of all, what's your name?
Henry.
Henry. It's good to meet you, Henry. Ask your question, please.
I skipped school today. I was wondering if I could get a picture with you.
Henry said, I skipped school. Can I have a picture with you? Well, I guess you got to have some excuse to skip school, so I might as well get a photo with Henry. Now the next reporter is going to be, hey, I'm from CNN. Can I get a photo with you too? I wish that I got questions that easy. I'm not holding out hope. Sir. Can we get you a microphone? I can't hear you, sir.
Gotcha. I'm Jordan Green with Raw Story. President Trump and other speakers here have blamed former Governor Cooper and the mayor of Charlotte for Irina Zarutska's death. Do you also hold the North Carolina General Assembly responsible, who set the laws governing pretrial release that may have affected this crime?
Well, look, I think every politician who didn't work hard to keep violent criminals behind bars deserves to have some of the blame. But at the very top of that list is Governor Cooper. Because at the time that we were pushing these soft-on-crime policies, Governor Cooper was the man in charge. Now, I know we've got some great North Carolina legislators, and I might call them out if they're here. Do we have North Carolina House Speaker Destin Hall? Where's Destin at? Destin, thank you, man. We got Phil Berger here. Phil, thank you so much. Senate President Pro Tem. We've got County Sheriff Van Shaw. Where's County Sheriff Van Shaw? Thank you, sir. We've got Cabarrus County DA Ashley Shanley. Is it Shanley? I got that right? Okay. Of course, we've got North Carolina GOP Chairman Jason Simmons. Jason Simmons is... That's a celebrity in the Trump White House there. North Carolina Labor Commissioner Luke Farley. Luke, where are you? Luke, thank you. And I know, look, I know that our great North Carolina local legislators here have worked very hard to solve some of these soft-on-crime policies and make it harder to let violent criminals out so easily, and to demand that when you have a violent criminal who goes in, the person stays there and doesn't get a slap on the wrist and released to commit more crime in the community. That's what we want. We don't want a criminal justice system that goes after innocent people. We also don't want a criminal justice system that lets obviously violent felons out of prison without any real consequences. It's just very simple. And again, I go back to the statistic where we have got such a small number of people who commit so much of the violent crime. If we just locked them up, and I mean, look, I believe in repentance and I believe in forgiveness, but I believe that forgiveness often only comes on the other side of real punishment and real regret, which is why we got to lock some of these guys up in the first place. So yeah, I blame the political leadership, and I can't get over a governor who pursued soft-on-crime policies, Roy Cooper, who pursued soft-on-crime policies, who let violent criminals out of prison, and then after Irina was murdered, to have the audacity to blame our law enforcement. Law enforcement arrested this guy 14 times. They did their job. It's time for the politicians to do their job too. Next question.
Vice President Vance, thank you so much for taking questions. I'm Casey Jones from WCCB Charlotte. When it comes to cracking down on crime in cities like DC, Memphis, Chicago, sending the National Guard, what specific metrics does the administration use to decide where those resources go? And can we expect that kind of response here in Charlotte anytime soon?
Well, look, if the mayor of Charlotte and the governor of North Carolina asked for our help, we would absolutely send it, because we believe in helping people regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. We would love to have the mayor of Charlotte reach out for our help. And that's, you asked what the metrics are, that's one of the most important metrics. We want to go where we can have a real partnership between local law enforcement and the federal officials so that we can root out the crime. And that goes to the second metric. What is the most important thing? You can tell how many people are being murdered in a community. You can tell how many carjackings there are. You can tell how many armed robberies there are. There's way too much violent crime happening in our country. And when we look at an American community, again, we don't care about their politics. When we look at an American community where people are suffering because of violent crime, our response is, we want to help, just let us. And I'd encourage everybody to talk to your local officials. I know we're a little far away from Charlotte, but to talk to your local officials and encourage them to ask for the help of the Trump administration. We are willing to provide it. We want fewer people to be affected by violent crime, but these guys have actually got to play a partnership role with us. And unfortunately, way too many of them, some of these people, it's crazy. They are ruling over cities that have violent crime rates that are worse than Mogadishu, and they say, no, 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 we don't want Donald Trump to come in. Well, excuse me, if you don't need the federal help, then why is your murder rate so terrible in the first place? You do need the help, you just need to admit it. Thank you, Casey. Next question.
Vice President, Michael Warwick, I'm with WPDE-TV. Welcome to Race and Country, first of all. Irina's law was just passed by Republican lawmakers. It's now on Governor Stein's desk. It addresses cashless bail. It would allow magistrates to involuntarily commit people who they believe to be sick. However, opponents of that bill don't think it goes far enough for the mental health side of things. It also opens the door to the death penalty, which I know some opponents are against. Why would you encourage the governor, politics aside, to sign that bill?
Well, because I want to keep violent criminals off the street, and I want Americans to be safer. And this bill does it. Irina's law does it. Congratulations to the Senate President and House Speaker for getting it over the finish line. The governor's got to sign it. I guarantee if this bill is signed into law, it will help our incredible law enforcement keep the streets safe. And that's ultimately all I really care about. Again, it breaks my heart to think that you have young kids, especially in poor communities, whether they're black or white, who don't feel like they can walk outside. You've got grandmothers who are taking care of grandkids who don't want to sit out on their front porch because they're worried about drive-by shootings. That should break everybody's heart, and the way to solve the problem is to empower these cops to go after the bad guys and to do it with their full skill and their full force. Now, I don't know, have I read every detail of the law? I know some of the things that it does. I know that it ends cashless bail, which would be huge for the people in North Carolina. I know it makes it harder for some of these local magistrates to let people out with a slap on the wrist. That would be huge for the people of North Carolina. But could there be more? There could always be more. But don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This bill is going to make North Carolinians safer. They ought to sign it.
Hi, Mr. Vice President. It's Kit Maher representing the White House TV pool today. I just have two national questions for you, if you'll allow it.
Go ahead.
Number one, on Ukraine, President Trump said that Ukraine can fight and win back its territory. Could you explain the shifting stance there from stopping the bloodshed, immediately ending the war, and now saying that Ukraine should fight? Is that a tactic to pressure Putin back to the table?
We'll go ahead and do the second question.
Yeah, second question. Last year, when I was covering you on the campaign trail, you told Joe Rogan that the difference between Harris and Trump is that Trump is not trying to censor his fellow Americans. Wondering if you can square your fervent belief in free speech with what's going on now with Jimmy Kimmel and the FCC pressure. I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of those.
Well, look, on the free speech conversation, I'm pretty sure that Jimmy Kimmel was back on the air last night, and to the extent that he's not back on the air, it's because he's not funny and has terrible ratings. This is not a federal government problem. This is... And Kid, I want to answer your question in good faith. What people will say is, well, didn't the FCC commissioner put a tweet out that said something bad? Well, Kid, compare that, the FCC commissioner making a joke on social media. What is the government action that the Trump administration has engaged in to kick Jimmy Kimmel or anybody else off the air? Zero. What government pressure have we brought to bear to tell people that they're not allowed to speak their mind? Zero. We believe in free speech in the Trump administration. We are fighting every single day to protect it. Now compare that to the Biden administration, where we found out just yesterday that conservatives on YouTube and on a number of social media platforms were being censored. Why? Because the Biden administration picked up the phone and said, we want you to censor our political opponents. That is real government censorship, and it left the White House when Joe Biden left the White House. Now to Ukraine. Look, I've answered a version of this question probably 100 times over the past 3 months, and one of the things I'll say about the president is that he is responsive to the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is that, number one, we have engaged in incredibly good faith negotiations with both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and I believe the president is growing incredibly impatient with the Russians right now because he doesn't feel like they're putting enough on the table to end the war. That's number one. Number two, the president has grown very confident that this war is bad for Russia. You hear me say this all the time. You hear the president say this all the time. The war is bad for Russia. It's bad for Ukraine. It's bad for America. We want the killing to stop. That remains the president's position. But the president also can look at reality on the ground. He sees the economic numbers that are coming out of Eastern Europe. He sees the number of dead people, both Russians and Ukrainians, that are happening in that war. And the president is telling Vladimir Putin it is time to stop the killing. He would say that to Zelensky. In fact, has said that to Zelensky. He wants this war to end, and he's doing everything that he can to stop it. But look, if the Russians refuse to negotiate in good faith, I think it's going to be very, very bad for their country. That's what the president made clear. It's not a shift in position. It's an acknowledgement of the reality on the ground. We're going to keep on fighting for peace every single day in the Trump administration. I'll do one more question here. Another question. Sir.
I want to take it from you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Vice President. Monica Casey, WRAL out of Raleigh. We are coming up on the one-year anniversary of Hurricane Helene's devastation.
Sure.
What is the administration doing to speed up the distribution of federal aid for that disaster?
Yeah, so just in the last week, the Secretary of Homeland Security put another, I believe, $64 million into the disaster relief effort. We inherited, I'm going to be honest with you, a FEMA that was mired in bureaucracy and red tape. The President has made very clear from day one, we want to get relief to the people of North Carolina as quickly and as rapidly as humanly possible, and that's what we're trying to do. The second thing I'll say is that I understand the governor had a very good call with the president, I believe on 9/11 actually, about a week and a half ago. It may have been, the day before or the day afterwards. But he had a good conversation with the president about some of the disaster relief needs that are there. We're going to keep on working on this. We're going to keep on working with some of our colleagues and the federal congressional delegation from North Carolina. But let me just say, I've visited the devastation myself. I want the people there to know we continue to think about them. We continue to work on this issue. And we're going to make sure that we never forget that area of North Carolina and the devastation that storm caused. Great. All right. On that note, I just want to say you guys have been an incredible group to get to spend some time with. Henry, I hope you got the photo you needed. So are you going to get like a tardy, Henry, or what's the deal? If you get a photo with the vice president, you're allowed to have an excused absence? Is that how that works? Okay, he doesn't know, actually. Henry is not as confident in that question as I would have hoped, but it's great to meet you, my friend. It's great to be with all of you. Just remember, we've got a very, very important job, and each and every single one of us has a role to play. To our law enforcement, thank you for the job that you do. We're going to keep on fighting for you in the Trump administration. We're going to keep on fighting for safety and security all across the state of North Carolina. God bless you. Thank you for having me.